In the middle of tremendous darkness and personal tragedy, false lights are trying to guide us, and they can bring shipwreck. We must be focused on God's pathways and His light in the storms of life. Christ is the light of navigation. Hello, and welcome to the Light of Navigation and the God Stories. My name is Marguerite Lever-Woodall, and I'm an author, speaker, and your host. I write short stories about real-life supernatural encounters with God, and I love to explore what it means to follow God's pathways. In this 6th episode of the God Stories, called God and the Keepin On, I'll share with you a story of just how dynamic and powerful spoken words can be. When they're prompted by God's Spirit through someone, it's life-changing. Come and join me in the adventures of the God Stories and experience the encounters with the goodness of God even in the middle of our life's storms. "1997 was a rough time for me. After being widowed in 1988, at the age of 32, I had remarried in 1993, 5 years later, and it was a disaster. It was like being caught in an emotional whirlwind that was never ending. Alcoholism destroyed the marriage, and I couldn't stop it. The confusion, the anger, and the pain, along with the emotional tearing that occurs, is overwhelming. I was faced with the sad reality that divorce was imminent. 4 years of this emotional roller coaster was enough. I had done everything I knew to do to salvage the marriage, but I could not compete with the alcohol. My son and I had been abandoned as a family unit because of it. There was such a devastation of trust that had occurred that it had brought me to a point of no return emotionally and led to eventual divorce. In all fairness, with regard to this marriage and the other person involved, is the truth that I had married out of God's will. I had to take responsibility for my poor decisions as well. The loneliness of being widowed drove me to seek a marriage partner outside of God's leading, and I was paying a horrible price for my folly. In retrospect, going forward with a marriage to this man had done just as much damage to him as it had done to me, because it was ending in the wrenching pain of divorce. Our own arrogance can lead to so much destruction. During this time period, there was one day in particular that was a huge hardship for me. Shopping for groceries was important, but as I shopped, I struggled to remember what was needed. Physical and emotional exhaustion had overtaken me, and it was almost driving me to my knees, literally. I physically fought to put one foot in front of another. The emotional chaos of my crumbling marriage had taken its toll. I fought to maintain my composure in that grocery store as I walked in. Everything in me just wanted to break down in the middle of the shopping aisle. My heart was breaking. As I slowly shopped, a man suddenly whipped by me in an electric store cart. Whizzing on ahead of me, he turned down the next aisle. An extreme weight issue had made walking difficult for him. I watched briefly as he disappeared around the next corner. And 30 minutes later, I was slowly shuffling to the checkout area, when once again the man in the store cart came out from around the corner of another aisle and promptly stopped right in front of me. Though he was a total stranger, he'd stopped to ask a simple question. He asked me, "Are you a Christian?" And somewhat surprised, I replied, "Well, yes. Yes, I am." The man then quickly replied in a commanding voice that I recognized as a direct word from God. "The Lord told me to tell you this. Keep on keeping on. Keep on keeping on." The moment those words left his lips and I heard them, it was as though my entire being physically, mentally, and emotionally stood. A powerful, supernatural yet silent energy quickly filled me, and the imminent physical collapse, the mental fatigue, and the emotional exhaustion left me instantly. The man's spoken word from the Lord was alive. It was living. I'd never encountered a situation where the words being spoken by someone had a tangible power of that magnitude. It was as though all the exhaustion I was experiencing, on so many levels, had never existed in the first place. Before I could respond, the man had disappeared from sight, and I left that grocery store with a new hope and a strengthening I'd never known before. What we speak to others can be enormously powerful, more than we know. Some words release destruction, others, life. As Christians, we hear frequently in sermons and teachings how powerful words are. But do we really understand that? In the reflection of this event, even years later, I realized I didn't when I thought I did. Over many years, I've periodically remembered that particular God moment, and I will never forget that man. I can't. He spoke a direct word from the living God that lifted me up when it was needed most. The profound impact of his words will compel me to be looking for him in heaven when I leave this world. His obedience to God to speak a brief yet commanding word of encouragement to a total stranger brought powerful results. It brought me up from my knees. Like apples of gold in settings of silver is a word spoken at the proper time. Proverbs 25, verse 11. Thank you for taking time to listen to my story. If this podcast would encourage someone you know who needs to know that God is still speaking, please pass it on. Your comments are valued, and subscribing would also be appreciated. God shows up in the most unexpected places. In the 7th episode of the God Stories, allow me to share with you about someone whose simple, daily God-inspired habit overwhelmed me. I ended up engulfed in God's presence and love as I walked away, weeping. This upcoming episode is a memorial to this man's simple, loving routine. The title of the story is God and the Garage Door Waiver.